Hey everyone, thanks for checking out today's video. I just wanted to stop in quickly before we start things off and just let you know that this isn't one of my longest videos, but it's a little bit more technical and the middle section of the video might get a little bit dry with measurements and such. I'm going to create chapters in this video so that you can skip certain parts if you feel like you get it and I'm over explaining things. So just one thing before we get started here. I would really love it and greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe to my channel, like this video. It will help me and inspire me to create more content, and I'm constantly thinking of new things that I can, new projects that I can work on that I can show you. So with that being said, let's get started. Hey guys, the next project that I'm working on here is I'm going to be making myself a router sled. It's something that I've needed now for quite a while. The last couple of years I've actually been utilizing my CNC machine to do slab flattening, essentially using it kind of as a slab flattening router sled. The problem is it's a very slow process because when you're using the CNC, if you have like an oddly shaped piece, you still have to go in a rectangular pattern. So a lot of time is spent with the router just going off and planing the air, basically. I've had my eyes on some commercial products, router sled products that look pretty cool. They're pretty expensive though. I've seen them range from $500 to over $1,000. And what they essentially are is just two real long rails and then two rails that go across those rails, and then you mount the router on it, and then it allows you to just kind of freehand, route the piece. So recently in my social media feed on Facebook, I've seen advertisements for what looks identical to those products that I've seen, the pre-made router sleds, as far as the rails go. So I see like what looks like the identical rails for sale on Vevor.com or Vevor, however you pronounce it, I'm not entirely sure, right here. So what I did is I ordered myself some smaller rails and then some long ones back here. I think these are about 78, 79 inches, and I think these are about 39 inches, which is, pretty much about what I need. These rails are actually really cheap considering how much you would pay for a pre-made product with rails that look just like these. I think for both these rails and these rails, I think it was like $135, which is substantially less than if you buy a pre-made system. The only thing that I'm going to have to do is just kind of come up with how I'm going to actually mount the router to it, but honestly that doesn't look like it's going to be that tough. So yeah, I'm going to put this thing together and see if I can build myself a router sled. So I guess I'll start with unpacking. Okay, so yeah, honestly, this is actually better quality than what I expected for the price. These ball bearings really seem to move slick on these rails. So what I'm essentially going to do is I'm going to build a platform for the router. These rails will actually sit and be attached to the other much longer rails. And so these will be able to glide back and forth on those rails, and then the router will be able to glide back and forth on these rails. And I really like that smooth action.
Yes, but no, seriously, that is pretty much how I felt when I first pulled out this manual and was looking at the diagrams for the parts. Very small, and unless you have really good vision, you have to do what I did and take a picture and zoom in. I want to take you through the measurement process and exactly what it is that I designed. And I'm going to take you in reverse order because I feel like it will make more sense that way if you kind of see the end product, which is what you're looking at right here on the screen. When I say end product, I mean the router plate, which is this thing. This is where the router is going to sit. And these two pieces here make up one side of the rail support. So these two pieces will sit on top of each other, and I will explain this further. And they will be used for the rail support that will sit on they'll kind of glide over the longer rails that I use for the y-axis, or what I'm calling the y-axis. So I wanted you to see this final thing, because when I take you back and start showing you the measurements and all that stuff, you can keep this visual in your mind, and hopefully it will make more sense. So again, you kind of see the design that I had here. You can see that these support plates that I have them drawn out here. I have the router plate, and you're seeing a lot of extra lines and squares and rectangles and circles that were not on the other screen, which is the cutout, the final product. And that is because I have a lot of these, or I'm using these squares so I can better visualize the design and to help me with my measurements. Obviously, I'm not cutting out a lot of this stuff. I'm only basically cutting out the outer rectangles for the plates and the circles for the screw holes. So you can see here that I this really crude drawing of my router. So this is the front of the router, and this is the back. These circles represent the handles of the router, and this rectangle that you see here, as well as over here, is a representation of the rails themselves that feed through the rail carriage blocks, and these represent the rail carriage blocks. So if you can visualize this, say you have your hands on each one of these handles on your router, you're going to be moving this thing back and forth. In this case, the way I have things laid out, it would be up and down. So it would slide along those rails. So we'll go to the rail support plates that I've designed, and these are going to sit essentially on top of the longer rail carriage blocks. And similar thing, basically the only way that I can get this thing laid out properly and get the screw holes and everything exactly where they need to be is based on these square blocks that I've drawn out here, and these are actually based on measurements of the rail carriage blocks, which I will show you shortly. As I stated when we were looking at the previous screen, these two plates are actually going to sit on top of each other. Now all of these plates are going to be cut out of 1/4-inch plywood, and in order to strengthen them, I have two pieces. And it actually works out for the best that I have two pieces for the rail supports, because I'm cutting out something slightly different on each one. And we'll take a quick look at this again. So as you can see, one of these, I have a bigger hole here, and you can just, this little circle in the middle, you can just throw that out. That just gets cut out. And the top one, all the holes are the same size. Well, not quite, but they're close. Some of the holes are M5s, some are M6s. I'll explain that later. And the top one, I also have these grooves cut out. Let me see if we can adjust this a little bit so you can maybe see the grooves. can kind of see how I have a 2mm depth on those grooves. So yeah, this little diagram right here demonstrates what's going on with these two plates. So this bottom plate, this bottom rectangle you see here, is for this bottom plate. Likewise, this top one is representative of this top one over here. So we have these rail supports that are going to come with the rail kit. And this is what the X-axis rails are going to go through. And this whole thing is going to sit on top of the Y-axis. So taking that into consideration, you see the rail support here that I have drawn out, again very crudely. That matches up with this box, and these screw holes here align with these holes here from a top view on both of these. Now the reason why on the bottom one this hole is so big is because I actually want this back screw, I want the head to go inside, be recessed inside. I don't want it sticking out like I have that one sticking out, because of this piece, these rail supports need to sit directly on top of the rail carriage block. So this one I want recessed. That's why I got this big hole, and it won't go all the way through because the top one is just a M6. So it'll just stay right in there. In fact, technically this is going to be butted right up against the bottom there. So that's more like what it should be. So really it's pretty straightforward. As you can see that I have this rail support kind of down into the wood here. That is represented by this groove. So I have that groove on both sides. Have it over here. And that is just to give the rail support some additional support from wanting to like wiggle back and forth. It probably isn't 100% necessary, but as I may explain later, I don't necessarily have the screws super tight on these, just to give it a little bit of play, so that everything's not so rigid that the rail system doesn't want to move. I mean, it'll move, but if you have everything really clamped down super tight, if you don't have things just lined up perfectly, it may make it a little bit more rough. So yeah, that's what that is all about. So yeah, hopefully this gives you a pretty good visual of what these two support rail designs that I have are for. The router plate here is obviously a lot more easy to visualize. And again, I actually will have two of these, but they're identical. And they're just going to sit right on top of each other. And again, it's just to make the 1/4 inch plywood thicker, to make it more of like a 1/2 inch. It's less likely to want to flex. So yeah, as stated, these diagrams, I have these rectangles here, and they're just representative, as well as these circles. They're basically just representative of the rail itself going through the carriage blocks. And I had to do this because I needed to visualize exactly where I needed to lay out my carriage blocks. One thing to keep in mind with these rail support plates that the carriage blocks are going to mount to underneath, and the rail supports are going to mount to on top, is that they need to be 3 millimeters longer on each side. As you can see here, it sticks out further, as well as that side. So a total of 6 millimeters. And that is because of the size difference in the rail carriage blocks, and as well as the rail support. As you can see, the rail support sticks out beyond the carriage block, and the rail itself goes through the center of the rail support. So you have to adjust for that, along with the actual fact that the rail carriage block is smaller. I actually had to go through several iterations of this design before I actually got it right. I wasn't thinking about certain aspects of how these actually align together, and it wasn't until I decided, let me represent the rail itself and how it feeds through. It wasn't until then that I realized that, yeah, I can't have the rail carriage blocks completely lined up, which is what I had tried to do before. So I had like this rail carriage block centered with this one, and it was like, oh, that clearly is not right. So yeah, hopefully that makes quite a bit of sense, maybe. So let's go up to where this all starts. So when I was looking at the manual, really a lot of the work was looking at these diagrams. Let me zoom into this one. This is the carriage block that is on the y-axis rails, the longer ones I'm using. So as you can see, you have these labels represented by letters, and these correlate to charts in your manual. So you can see that. And they list all of their different product models in here. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to correlate which product number you're using, and then match it up with the letter, which is representative of a specific measurement, and then you correlate it down here in the proper chart. So that's really what took me a long time to do, to make sure I was actually getting the right values and everything. So what I did is, I got it for the rail carriage block that I'm using on the y-axis, the rail support that we've already looked at, got those measurements, wrote all those down, and then the rail carriage block for the x-axis rails. Like I said, unless you have great vision, you have to do what I did and take a picture of it so you can zoom way into it and actually see. And really, it's not even printed all that well. It's kind of fuzzy here. Definitely, really, the big thing that's lacking with this product is really good, big, easy to read diagrams. That would have been a lot more helpful to me. So we have a rail carriage block that I'm using for the y-axis. I have all the measurements written down here as labels, or not even really labels, because I'm doing this in VCarve. So I wish that you could do labels in VCarve, and maybe you can. I just haven't figured it out so that it would be easier to read this. So I have all the measurements laid out. So for this particular rail carriage block, the actual block itself is a square. It's 45 millimeters by 45 millimeters. The internal square that I have here is to help me measure the distance between the center points of the screw holes. So the distance between the screw holes on the x-axis of this block is 30 millimeters. On the y-axis, it's 32. Don't know why they did it that way. Would have been easier if it was square, but easy enough to work with. This circle essentially represents the hole on the side of the rail carriage block and where the rail itself feeds through. And that, again, was to help me align these carriage blocks with the other carriage blocks. So the way that I do this in VCarve, and one of the reasons why I really like VCarve, is because not only can I use it to design things, but once I have everything designed, it's what I use to cut things out with on my CNC. And I do things in layers. So actually, let me drop my window down here so you can see what I'm doing. Okay. So I utilize layers here. So the first thing I do is I create like a measuring lines layer, and that's where I'm drawing my squares and everything for my measuring. So when the manual tells me, okay, these particular screw holes, the width or the distance between the center points is 30 millimeters by 32 millimeters, the easiest thing for me to do is in VCarve, I create a rectangle that's 30 millimeters by 32 millimeters, and then I center it in this one, which represents the outer dimensions of the rail carriage block. And then I know that the corners of the inside rectangle are going to be exactly where the center point of my screw holes need to be. So when I'm drawing this out, when you have that selected, it gives you this nice little box there that allows you to see exactly what the center of that screw is. So then you create your 5M size circle, and then you just move it with the keyboard or the mouse until it's right on that corner, and then you know you got it right on. So that's another reason why I really like this software when I'm designing things. So like I said, I have layers, and let me just turn those measuring lines off. So now you can see I have just the screw holes, and I have these rails. I'll shut those off too. So I had another layer to represent the rails. I make multiple layers to help me out with the design. And really, ultimately, what we end up cutting out is the screw holes. That's the big thing we're cutting out, and as well as the plate cutouts, which I don't have here, because typically the way I like to do this is I'll create the objects that I want to cut out, and if it's something relatively complex that I want to remember why I had things sized the way I did, I'll create these labels. And these labels are basically just part of my measuring line layers. Once I have these drawn out, then I'll just copy this whole thing and I'll bring it down to a different area where I actually paste it and start laying out exactly how I want it. Obviously I didn't feel the need to have my plate cutout rectangles up there because they're just basic rectangles. There's not much to it. So then I copy it. I make sure I remove everything I don't need. I want to keep the measurements, the lines. I don't need all the labels because I got them up above. And then I can lay everything out, copy and paste. Yeah, it's as simple as that. So I do the same thing for each of the parts that I'm laying out. And this is the rail carriage block that's used on the router plate. This is the rail carriage block that's used on the y-axis. And here is the rail support. And obviously everything is from the top down, like you're looking at everything from above. So these two, this rail carriage block and this rail support, they basically get combined into one. So we'll go back down here. This is where it looks pretty messy. So this is representative of the top rail carriage block that you saw, along with the rail support. They're put on top of each other. And again, it's from the top down, and this is just a representative of the side view. So yeah, basically that's how I do things. And once you know exactly what the measurements are of everything, it's really easy just to lay it out in VCarve. And then you have everything you need to cut it out. So yeah, it may be helpful if you are doing this project and you are going to be using the same rail kit the two rail kits that I have. Take a screenshot of that, and you got the measurements. Let me see if there's anything else here that needs some explaining. Yeah, this marker right here was just to remind me that, like I had mentioned earlier, that there's going to be this 3mm gap between where you have the rail carriage blocks on the router plate. You're going to have this 3mm gap on each side to the rail support. These particular measurements here are useful in the event that you're not going to be using a CNC machine to cut these out, and you need to know where the center of this hole falls. So this would be 7.5 millimeters in from the side there, and 10 millimeters in from that side, and that applies across the board here. And then Same thing with this particular rail carriage block that I'm using for the y-axis. It's 7.5 millimeters in and 6.5 millimeters in from the top, or the other side I should say, not top. This is one side, that's the side. Again, we're looking at it from the top down. And the same thing goes for down here. This one's a lot easier, just 7 by 7. Those are your rough measurements. The rail support and the rail carriage blocks I'm using on the x-axis are using M6 screws, where the other rail carriage blocks that I'm using on the y-axis rails are using M5. So those are the only two different screws you need. So what I'll do is down in the description, I will put all of the different size screws, how many I got, how many nuts, how many lock washers I used, so you know exactly what I did in the final product. I had several iterations of this where I cut things out and I didn't do things quite right. This is the final iteration that ended up working perfect for me. Hopefully this helps explain things. I know it's probably a bit confusing, but once you start doing it, it's a lot easier than it looks here. So again, this is ultimately what we're accomplishing, what we're attempting to cut out here, or what we are going to be cutting out here. These two rails, this rail sits on top, this one sits underneath this rail, and the rail support gets mounted right here in these two grooves. The router gets mounted on here, and the carriage blocks for all of this gets mounted underneath these plates. And you will see that when we go back out to the workshop and start cutting things out. So I guess we can go out to the workshop and cut things out and put this thing together.
Okay, so I have 2 pieces of 1/4 inch ply put together. I cut out 2 of these platforms, and for now, the thing that I need to do is I need to cut out where the router is actually going to mount to the platform. First, I want to make sure that I got these things aligned. So what I did here is I just put the M6 screws in the corners just to make sure they're perfectly aligned when I make my cuts. I had already drawn out, I don't even know if you can see that, the markings where so I can align that properly. So I'm just gonna trace the inside of this base plate so I know where I need to drill my holes and the area for the router bit and that. Okay, so I'll use my drill press to drill those out. So I am getting ready to actually mount the router, and this is probably going to be all kinds of fun. I do think, so for my particular router, they were the number 10 size. I imagine every router is going to be different, and I wasn't entirely sure lengthwise what I needed, and again, that's going to be different probably for every router. I bought the 1 1/4 inch length bolts or screws. Obviously it's going to be all kinds of fun because I need to do it from below, which isn't necessarily a problem because I can get under it pretty easily, but I'm probably going to push these bolts out, and I'm sure you know how that goes. So let's get to it. Okay, so I think I understand why the commercial products use the acrylic for the platform, so you can see through it and see what you're screwing into. That definitely wasn't easy, but somehow I managed to do it. All right, so there you have it. This thing is all done. It really wasn't as difficult as I thought it might be at the beginning when I first looked at the instruction manual. Really just getting all the measurements and figuring out how things need to be aligned. That was really the biggest challenge. I did make a couple iterations of these support rails here, only because I didn't quite measure things right. Made a couple assumptions that were incorrect. As I explained in the video, as I was walking you through how I do things in VCarve, What really helped was drawing the rails in the design so that I could make sure everything was aligned properly. Once I did that, it was super easy. Sometimes part of the design is being able to visualize everything that you're putting together, and that really helped with the alignment. So anyway, this was a really fun project, and I'm glad that you hung out with me to the end here. With that all being said, yeah, thanks again, and God bless, and I'll see you next time.